The notification popped up on Cale's phone just as he was about to flunk his third exam of the semester. His screen lit up with a single word: loop. Below it, a tagline: relive, rewrite, repeat. Cale stared at it, his thumb hovering over the delete button. He didn't remember downloading it, but then again, he didn't remember a lot of things these days, like the last time he'd slept more than 4 hours or eaten something that wasn't instant noodles. With a sigh, he tapped the icon. The screen went black, then lit up with a swirling vortex of colors. A voice, smooth and genderless, filled the room. "Welcome to Loop. You have been granted the ability to relive any 10-minute period of your life. Use it wisely." Cale blinked. "What the hell?" The voice continued. "To begin, select a moment. Think of a time you wish to revisit." Cale laughed nervously. "Okay, sure, let's play along." He closed his eyes, thinking of the exam he'd just bombed. The one he'd spent all night cramming for, only to blank out the second the paper hit his desk. He imagined the classroom, the ticking clock, the professor's stern face. When he opened his eyes, he was there. The clock on the wall read 9:50 a.m. His heart raced. This wasn't possible. He pinched himself, hard. It hurt. He was awake. He was here. The exam paper sat in front of him, blank and terrifying. His hands trembled as he picked up his pencil. This time he wouldn't freeze. This time, he'd remember the answers. 10 minutes later, the world blurred. Cale found himself back in his dorm room, his phone in hand. The notification was gone, replaced by a simple message: loop complete. Balance. 9 loops remaining. Cale stared at his phone, his mind reeling. He checked his email. There it was. A notification from the professor. His grade had been updated. He'd passed, not just passed, he'd aced it. At first, Loop was a game. Cale used it to fix small mistakes, awkward conversations, missed buses, burnt toast. He relived moments just to see what would happen if he said something different, took a different turn, made a different choice. Each time the world reset, and only he remembered. It was exhilarating, addictive. But then came the glitches. The first one happened during a loop he'd created to save himself from spilling coffee on his laptop. He'd relived the moment, avoided the spill, and everything seemed fine. But when the loop ended, he noticed something strange. His roommate, Jax, was wearing a different shirt. One Cale was sure he'd never seen before. When he asked about it, Jax just shrugged. "I had this shirt forever, man." Cale brushed it off, but the glitches kept coming. A painting in the hallway changed colors. A song he'd never heard before played on the radio. People he knew started saying things they'd never said before, referencing events that had never happened. And then there were the dreams. Every night Cale dreamed of other versions of himself. Some were happy, successful, living lives he could only imagine. Others were broken, lost, trapped in endless loops of their own making. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his phone glowing faintly on the nightstand. Balance. 6 loops remaining. The breaking point came when Cale tried to save his sister Lyra. She'd been in a car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light, and she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cale had been in class when it happened, oblivious until his mom called, her voice shaking. By the time he got to the hospital, it was too late. But now he had to loop. He selected the moment 10 minutes before the accident. He focused on the intersection, the traffic light, the sound of Lyra's laugh as she talked on the phone. When he opened his eyes, he was there. He saw her car approaching the light. He saw the drunk driver's truck speeding toward her. Without thinking, he ran into the street, waving his arms like a madman. The truck swerved, missing Lyra's car by inches. She slammed on the brakes, honking at him. "Cale, what the hell are you doing?" He didn't care. She was alive. That was all that mattered. When the loop ended, Cale was back in his dorm room. He called Lyra immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey, loser, what's up?" Cale nearly cried with relief. Nothing, just wanted to hear your voice. She laughed. You're such a weirdo. Love you. Love you too. But the relief didn't last long. The next day, Cale noticed something strange. Lyra's favorite necklace, the one their dad had given her before he died, was gone. When he asked about it, she looked confused. What necklace? Cale's stomach dropped. He checked his phone. Balance, 5 loops remaining. The glitches grew worse. Cale started seeing double, brief flashes of other versions of himself, other versions of the world. He'd walk past a mirror and see a stranger staring back. He'd hear voices whispering in languages he didn't understand. The lines between realities were blurring, and he didn't know how to stop it. He tried to stop using loop, he really did, but every time he thought he was done, something would happen. A missed deadline, a failed test, a fight with Lyra, and he'd give in. Each loop made things worse, but he couldn't stop. He was trapped in a cycle of his own making. And then came the warning. It appeared on his phone one night, glowing red. Warning, multiverse instability detected. Continued use of loop may result in catastrophic collapse. Cale stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He thought of Lyra, of the other versions of himself he'd seen in his dreams. He thought of the glitches, the voices, the strangers in the mirror. He thought of the necklace that no longer existed. He had to make a choice. Cale stood at the intersection, the one where Lyra had almost died. He'd looped back to this moment one last time. The app was open on his phone, the countdown ticking away. Balance. 1 loop remaining. He could save her. He could stop the accident, rewrite the timeline, make sure she lived. But at what cost? The multiverse was unraveling, and every loop made it worse. If he kept going, there might not be a world left to save. He thought of the other Kaels he'd seen, the ones who'd lost everything, the ones who'd given up. He thought of Lyra, alive and laughing in this timeline, but gone in so many others. He thought of the necklace, the painting, the song. All the little things that made up a life, all the things that could be lost. The light turned green. Lyra's car approached the intersection. The truck was coming. Cale closed his eyes and deleted the app. The world didn't end. Not right away. The glitches stopped, the voices faded, and the mirrors showed only his reflection. But Cale knew the truth. The multiverse was still out there, fractured and fragile, held together by the choices he'd made, and the ones he hadn't. Lyra lived. She didn't remember the accident, the necklace, or the warning. But sometimes, when she looked at him, Cale thought he saw a flicker of recognition, a memory of a timeline that no longer existed. And sometimes, late at night, he'd dream of other worlds, worlds where he'd made different choices, where he'd saved her, or lost her, or never known her at all, worlds where the app still existed, where the loops never ended. But when he woke up, he was here, in this world, with her, and that was enough.